Don Watson served in the U.S. Army Amphibious Engineers in Europe during World War II. He received 2 battle stars for his service. During World War II, what branch of service did you serve in?
I was in the Army Amphibious Engineers.
What was your rank?
Rank, I started out as a buck private. I was drafted in December of 1942.
Where did you serve?
I went through the reception center in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, and sent to Camp Edwards, Fort Devens, Massachusetts, where I had my basic training. Then we were moved over to Camp Edwards, which is just a short distance away. That's in Massachusetts. Then we were sent out on Cape Cod, where we started our training with the amphibious engineers using landing craft, floating cranes, tugboats, and we had maneuvers back and forth from Hyannis, Massachusetts to Martha's Vineyard, which was an island about 25 miles off the coast of Cape Cod.
Where did you do your basic training?
Pardon me?
Where did you do your basic training?
In Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
What was your main job or assignment during the war?
Well, in basic training, we all just took training, which was infantry training. Then after we started, I was made a supply clerk. And then after we left Massachusetts, we went to Camp Gordon Johnson in Florida, which was about 60 miles southwest of Tallahassee on the Gulf Coast, and continued our training, and we reorganized there. And I was made the supply sergeant, which was a staff sergeant rating, and we trained there for about 3 to 4 months in the Gulf of Mexico, with still using the equipment of floating cranes, tugboats, and landing craft.
Did you see combat?
No, my unit was not a combat unit.
But he was involved in D-Day, so ask about that.
Could you tell me about your experiences in D-Day?
In the what, please?
D-Day.
On D-Day, well, we were stationed in Plymouth, England. We got into England about March, the latter part of March, the 1st of April, and we still did training there. My main job was to gather all the equipment we needed, like steel helmets, gas masks, and our rifles, which was 30 caliber carbines, and a few of us had 45 caliber pistols. And we did some training on a beach that was up in England. It was very similar to Normandy, called Slapson Sands. And various units would have their maneuvers up there, and most of the residents had been moved out of that particular area. But there was one tragedy that happened about 2 weeks after our exercises up there. Another group was training there, and a German sub came in and torpedoed the LST and all of the men there, and they killed 749 American soldiers and sailors. And they kept that a secret all during the war because they didn't want to hurt the morale of the other soldiers. But on D-Day, the supplies started coming in about 10 days before June the 1st, and they'd fill up all the vacant spaces there, the fields and the roads, and our unit would transport the supplies and equipment out to the larger ships in the harbor at Plymouth, England. Then about June the 1st, the troops started coming in, all the combat troops. They came in by the thousands, and we transported them out to the larger ships out into the outer harbor, and it continued. Then the D-Day was supposed to have been on June the 5th, but because of the bad weather, they had to postpone it, and that, of course, the troops were all on board the ship. They're ready to go, and they were very anxious to have something to happen. But on D-Day, by the afternoon, we were bringing back wounded people to take to the hospitals in England. And I have here, on D-Day, the casualties alone was 6,603 people. Now that don't mean death. There were 1,465 dead, 3,184 wounded, 1,928 missing, and 26 unaccounted for. So you see, the first day of the invasion was strictly a very bad day.
Tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences.
Well, after D-Day, we stayed in Plymouth for about 10 days, and then our unit was to go into France, into Cherbourg first. And the headquarters company, the part that I was in, we went by landing craft into Utah Beach, then up to Utah Beach to heading for Cherbourg. And we got stopped off just outside of Cherbourg by the MPs saying that the Germans had not been cleared. And we had to bivouac there for about 3 days, and we had limited amount of supplies and food. So we did a little bartering with the French farmers there, and we swapped sugar and coffee for some eggs and vegetables to tide us over for the 3 days. Then our boat part of the company came directly from England into Cherbourg, and our job was to clear the ports of all the damaged stuff and mines or anything like that, and so that the larger ships could come in and bring the troops directly into the shore.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
We had two battle, because we were not combat, but we were so close to the battle. We had 2 stars in our emblem up here for being in the battle. Because when we cleared the port of Cherbourg, we followed the Allied troops around the coast of France on into Saint-Malo and Saint-Barac and Morlaix, and we set up headquarters in Morlaix, and we sent men on in as they moved on into Brest. We'd had break down the units in maybe 25 to 30 people who operated the craft in those ports. And Morlaix, we stayed probably the longest time, but it took us sometimes from 3 to 4 weeks to get our mail until after we got settled there. We hadn't received any mail or anything, and my job was to take supplies and mail to the troops in the ports that we had already been and left a few men. And we stayed there from June until the 1st of January in 1945. And then we went all the way across France, heading for Antwerp, Belgium, for the port of Antwerp, and Bremenhaven, Germany, but we got stopped off again in just outside of Liège, France, Belgium, because of the Battle of the Bulge. And we had to bivouac there in the snow. It was about 4 to 8 inches deep, and all we had was 2 blankets. We slept in the back of the truck all that time. And then because of the uncertainty of what the Germans were going to do, they were given quite a battle there. That was one of the worst battles in the war. And they sent us back to Rouen, France, which was about midway between Paris and Le Havre. And then we sent part of our unit into Antwerp and Bremenhaven. And we settled there in Rouen. And they later gave us about 400 to 500 German prisoners to repair a dry dock. Most of our men were a little older. Like, I was 24-year-old before I went into the service. And we had, most of the men that came in had some experience as engineers, mechanics, carpenters, or some type of experience in civilian life. And they were pretty good to supervise the repair of that dry dock on the Seine River, which had been destroyed.
Did you sustain any injuries?
I had no bad injuries. I did fall and hurt my hip from a ladder, and they tried to take me to the hospital, but I wouldn't go because of I didn't want to be departed from my unit, because once you're departed from your unit, you never get back with it. And I'd been with them all the time in service, and I didn't want to be departed. But it was not a major injury, I still have a hip problem, but that's...
How often were you able to communicate with your family?
Well, I would write my mother. My dad was dead. He had died in '39, but my mother, I kept at least once a week if I could. But the first 5 or 6 months, we had very little return of mail from the time we got into France until we got into Morlaix, which was approximately 3 months. It was awfully hard to get mail, and sometimes it'd be 2 to 3 weeks behind time. But I corresponded with several people from home as I could. And on Christmas of 1944, we were still stationed in Morlaix, and I had a friend. Our unit was composed of a very variety of people. We had about a third Protestant people, about a third Jewish, and about a third Catholic. And my best friend was a Catholic boy from Boston, Massachusetts, and on New Year's Eve, he had found a little Catholic church there that was going to have Mass, and didn't know much about the Catholic religion, and he insisted that I go. So I went with him, just a little village there, and I didn't understand what they said because it's all in Latin or French, but at least it was an experience that I always remembered. But it ended up that particular boy was one of my best friends, and when I came back from the service, I married a girl from Rhode Island, and he was my best man, and I didn't know they were not supposed to perform a ceremony in a Protestant church, but he went ahead and did it.
How did you feel when you got letters from home?
And I got what?
When you got letters from your...
Well, it was always good to get letters from home, especially from your mother. But I corresponded with several that I was well acquainted with. I was single, and I had a few little girlfriends back home, and I corresponded to several of them.
What was the food like? What was the food like?
What
was the food like?
Food like?
Yes.
In some places it was good, and some places it was bad. A lot of places they had goat meat, and I tell you, I could not stand goat meat. But a lot of times we would have just hard, the K rations, especially when we were on moving. And as I stated before, we did a little bartering with the French farmers and swapped sugar sometimes and coffee to get eggs and vegetables to survive us.
Would you tell me about any particularly humorous event that happened to you or someone you know?
Humorous things?
Yes.
Well, there's 2 or 3. My captain was a pretty, always good to his men, but he was a little bit high-strung sometime. And I remember in Rouen, France, we had an inspection for my supply room, and I'm knock-kneed and I can't get my heels together when you come to attention. And he came in with the colonel and said, called attention, and he saw that my heels were not quite together, and he said, "Get your heels together, Sergeant Watson." Well, I was dumbfounded. I didn't know what to do. So I just showed him, pulled my pant legs out to show him I was knock-kneed, and he said, "At ease." And as the colonel came by, he kind of patted me on the back. He said, "Good answer, Sergeant." And then after his inspection was over, the captain came into my tent. He said, "Sergeant Watson, why did you try to make a fool out of me in front of the colonel?" I said, "Captain, you made a fool out of yourself, not me." So but he was always a good friend to me after that. I ended up being his administrative officer.
What did you think of your fellow soldiers?
They were good. We had a very good, especially knowing that we had only a few Southern boys in my outfit. We had about 160 men in my company, and they represented all but 8 states. And most of them were from Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and then those scattered throughout the West. But I had friends in a lot of those areas.
Did you keep a personal journal or diary?
No, not except in my head.
What do you recall about the day the war ended?
The day the war ended, well, of course, we were all hoping that we'd go home. And it came out that the officers were all eligible to go home because of points. They'd received so many points, excuse me. But most of us enlisted men liked about 2 to 3 points having enough, because they told us we were going straight to Japan, to the Pacific. And we reorganized. And most of the officers left. And my captain, who, as I said, was a real good soldier, but sometimes he was a little bit spry, you know. But he took care of his men, and he said he would stay and go with us to the Pacific if he could make his new officers out of the enlisted men. So I was selected as one, and I became a warrant officer and his administrative officer. But then when we were just about ready to go, the war ended in Japan. And most of the people my unit went home except the ones who had taken the new officers, and we had to stay for 6 months. And I was transferred then to Brussels, Belgium, in the Chandler Base headquarters, and worked in redeployment, administrative work.
What do you remember most about the day you went home?
Well, I went home kind of as a surprise. I was supposed to stay 6 more months, but in my section there in Brussels headquarters, we had about 10 in the redeployment section, a major and 2 lieutenants and me as a warrant officer and about 5 enlisted men. And in reading the articles, it said that anybody that had over 2 years in service could get a 45-day TDY. That's temporary duty in the States. And I asked the major, and he said, well, sure. He said, I'll help you get it. And I got a surprise 60-day leave to come back to the States. I had heard that once you got back that you possibly wouldn't have to return. And I wasn't able to notify my mother or anyone at home. And I left in April of 1946 and came home and was there 30 days on my 45 days. And I get a telegram to report back to Camp Atterbury, and it didn't say why. I thought sure I was going back to Brussels. And I got there, the captain that I had to meet had my folder, and he went through it and he said, do you want to stay in the service? And I said, not necessarily. Do you want to go back to Brussels? I said, not if I don't have to. He said, well, you're eligible to be discharged. And I was discharged right there, which was quite a surprise.
Tell me about your close friendships while you were in the service.
Well, of course, our company was so scattered, some of the men I wouldn't see for 2 or 3 months because they were stationed, like when we were in Morlaix, France, we had men in other ports like in Brest and Cherbourg, and maybe they'd be 200 to 300 miles apart. And when we were in Rouen, we still had people in Brest, one section of about 25 men, and we had about 40 to 50 men in Antwerp, Belgium. And the only time I'd get to see them about once a week, I'd have to make a trip to take their supplies and mail and stuff like that, which was about 200 miles back and forth. And I wouldn't see a lot of them, but the main group there were very, very close. And I've had several of them to visit me after I came home, and I corresponded for some time with some of them. But my last trip up through the east, I called up one of the boys, and his wife answered and said he died. I went to another town in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and my supply clerk, I called the number, and he had died. And later, a year or two later, I was in Mississippi and called on a boy, and he had died 3 months. And I told my wife, I'll never call another one, and I haven't.
What did you go on to do as a career after the war?
What did I do?
Yes.
I came home and I had worked in Harriman before I went into service. And I went back to work there for a while. And then the girl that I met in Rhode Island, I called her, and she, after a lot of persuasion, I got her to come down to visit me and meet my mother-in-law. And then later, I went up to meet her. And then after I came home on the full time, we were married up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. But unfortunately, I lost my wife in '63. She died here in Maryville.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about the war or the military in general?
Repeat that.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or the military in general?
Well, wars is a terrible thing. I'm not an advocate of war unless it's absolutely necessary, but I think that the World War II was one of the necessary wars. And we had excellent leaders. Eisenhower was one of the best leaders that I've ever known and read about. But the experience in the Army gave you discipline was one of the best things that any young person could get by going into the service, is discipline. We all worked together, and whether there's what religion, it didn't matter, even black or white, it didn't matter. They all could help you sometime if you got in trouble. But I was very fortunate to be in a good unit, and I was lucky that I didn't have any bad experiences. I did have 2 close calls. When we were in Cherbourg, we would take vacant houses that the Germans moved out, and one night we had to sleep on the floor. We couldn't have any, wasn't able to carry cots or anything with us as we went along. And we were about 10 or 12 of us in this room sleeping on the floor, and there was a big picture on the wall, and one of the boys saw something sticking out, and he unfortunately went up to check it, and a grenade fell down on the mantelpiece, and it waddled back and forth. Unfortunately, it didn't hit the floor. If it had, it killed all of us. And that was one of the close experiences. The other was in Morlaix. The boys from down on the port called up to the headquarters and said there was a barge that floated ashore on high tide, and they wanted to have it checked it out. So the captain asked me to go with him, and just as we started to go, his company clerk came out and told the captain that he was wanted at the headquarters in Morlaix, and the captain turned around and sent 2 other fellows. And when we came back, we found that they had stepped on mines, and both of them were badly injured, and they were sent to the hospital in England, and we never did see them anymore. We don't know what their outcome was, but it could have been me.
How did your service and experiences affect your life?
In my civilian life? Well, of course, I was old enough to know that it interrupted my career to begin with, but I came back and it didn't bother me a lot. And I went right on ahead with my work. And I took a job as a sales representative for Hot Point Appliances for East Tennessee after I came back and worked at the old place first. And then after about 6 or 7 years, I moved to Maryville and opened up a Western Auto, and that's where I ended up. After 35 years, I retired there.
Could you tell me a little bit about your helmet that you brought?
Well, like most Americans or soldiers, we were interested in artifacts. Going into Cherbourg, there was still, most of the time they'd clear out the dead, you know, but there was still a few dead laying along and all their equipment. And I picked up this German helmet and I was able to send it home, which they had a much heavier helmet than what the Americans had, but the American helmets were good. And also, I brought a couple of pistols home that I was able to get along, which I keep in a safe, very safe place.
Is there anything you'd like to add to this interview that we haven't talked about?
Well, there's not a lot, because my experience was like most of the soldiers, except I definitely was lucky. I didn't have to go into any actual combat, but we were always close. We followed the troops from around the beaches to clear the ports of most of the places. And if we hadn't had good men to clear out the mines and things like that, floating mines and things, we could have had a lot of problems. But we were lucky, and our company was almost what we call an independent company operating around the amphibious engineers.
Well, thank you for coming and sharing your story.
Well, now, she has over there, I have a map of my tour of duty, and if she wants to show it, and a few pictures if she wants to see it. Is that all in for me?
Okay, just whatever you'd like to say about that.
Okay. You want me to start it now?
Yes, sir.
My unit left Plymouth, England in about June the 15th and landed on Utah Beach. We came up this way toward Cherbourg. That was our first destination. Our boat section was to come straight across from Plymouth, England into Cherbourg, and they were delayed because of the bad weather again, and we lost 3 men by being washed overboard on the coming over because of the crap. Then from there we followed the Allied troops around St. Malo and all the way around to Morlaix, and we stayed there quite a little bit. That's the first time we had any stop. Then we went up through and sent some men on into Brest, and we worked this port here, and St. Malo was so badly damaged we couldn't do anything about it. After staying here about 6 months, in January of 1945, we moved all the way across France, heading for Brussels, Antwerp, Belgium. But we got stopped off at the Belgian line right inside of Belgium, Liège, because of the Battle of the Bulge. And then we came back to, I'm a little lost here, to Rouen, France. And then later we sent our men on into Antwerp, part of the men, and we stayed in Rouen, which is right outside of Rouen, a little place called Petit Couronne, right on the coast of the Seine River. But that's what this map represents mostly. But there was a lot of territory that we traveled there. Most of the time it was by truck.
Very interesting.
And we still got some more time, don't we?
Actually, this is 30 minutes. We're at 30 minutes.
Do we have enough tape to go over a little bit on some people? Because he's got some stuff in his scrapbook.
I don't know whether you want to use that.
Okay.
The Amphibious Engineers was a rather new organization. It was organized in May of 1941, and they did their training usually in Fort Devens, Mass. And Camp Edwards, Massachusetts. And the object of the company was to transport supplies and equipment either from shore to ship or ship to shore. And it's made up of quite a few people in different categories of their civilian life, like engineers, mechanics, and all that.
So you're, okay, let's go from there, please.
And you can see here on D-Day the places that they came in. The coast of France is divided in 5 different sections. 1 for the Canadians, 2 for the British, and 2 for the American troops. The American troops was Omaha Beach and Utah Beach. My unit, the part of it that I was in, came in on Utah Beach, and the main part came in directly to Cherbourg, and that was our first objective for my company. It was to clear out the ports that we went into. And I have just a few pictures. That's me when I was a private when I first went in.
Could we go back? Could we, let me get a shot of that. There we go. Huh. Okay.
I had one leave while I was in Massachusetts, and my mother insisted that I have a picture made in my uniform.
Sure.
And that was my last picture in Rouen, France. I was after I'd become a warrant officer. And we lived in tents, and I had a pass that I could in my delivering of food when I was a sergeant in a place. I could go and spend the night with any Navy, Army, or Air Force base. And when I was in England, I got to go quite a few places to pick up food, and 2 or 3 people I knew that I got to see while I was over there. Like in England, Glenn Brown, who used to live in Kingston, which became the manager of the White Store here in Maryville, was stationed with the glider outfit, and I got to have lunch with him up there. And I have here just a list of my men, and here's my memories of D-Day. And here's, of course, like that map. And here's some of the pictures. This was our outfit. These were our men on D-Day with the troops ready to go into. Here's some more of them. And these are just miscellaneous pictures too. You might not want to see all of them. Here was the guy that I was telling about, Joe Priori, who was a devout Catholic and lived in Boston, who became my best man. Now here's damaged places in Plymouth, England. Plymouth, England was badly damaged. And we would have from 5 to 8 air raids a day or night, but most of them were going over Plymouth instead of being in Plymouth. And I had one experience there that the British would shoot shells up in the air that would explode, and I have that little piece of flak over there, and to have flak to go out, and we were in an air raid tunnel, and one of those hit the top of my head, and my steel helmet made a little dent in it, but didn't hurt, but I brought it home for a souvenir. I don't guess you want to see all of these.
We probably don't have,
That's all right.
but if there are
I want
any
to show you one
particular
picture.
ones that are,
To show you the horrors of death. This was in Rouen, France. The Americans bombed their troops. They were getting ready to hit England. Look at the dead Germans. All this damage. And fortunately, incidentally, when I was in Brussels, I had pneumonia, and I spent 8 days in the hospital in Antwerp, Belgium. Here are the Stars and Stripes from D-Day through the 15th. I was able to save those and send them home.
that's great.
I picked up a rifle in Brest, and we were allowed to send any equipment like that home if it was captured German stuff. And they had all kinds of rifles just after they moved out. And I had this one rifle. It's a Mauser carbine model so-and-so, serials okayed, and had it packed and sent it home. Somebody wanted it worse than I did. They took it. I never did get it. This was a medal we got after we got home.
If you don't mind, could we would you mind turning the book back?
The French came over to UT about 3 or 4 years ago, and there was 4 people from Blount County that went. I was one of them that we received that medal for being into St. Mary Église France, right after D-Day. There was a whole group over East Tennessee. We met at UT and had that. I guess that's about all. I'd
Okay.
say that's about all.
Well, thank you for sharing that.